Fan món cúisle. Yep, hí gom tú aga.
Agus tá fáú na fáilteú ag géal na gil éineacht is mise cúisle na léamh agus mise ag obair mar at the Gachtronschool le Conradh na Guerilla. So just you're all very welcome here tonight. My name is Christa Wilson and I am a project officer with Conradh na Guerilla. I just want to say a big Jared to all our friends who are watching live from America. So JD, agus Guerilla by it's more an honour to Elena they are pushed Elena Carriga agus they part up the war bubble door na mona. Tashimar I'm ag fail in the Carriga. Agus na hamapí ar fad a bhain leis an eile an léna spásanna a cruthú a caitheann séir se intíne agus anama a másc an phobail. So it's my complete honour to have been on the organising committee of Fail in the Carriga this year and to have been welcomed with open arms into the wider community of Lorcan. Fail in the Carriga and indeed all the events associated with Fail in the Carriga aim to create spaces that foster critical reflection and community empowerment, and our lecture tonight is no exception. The amhránaí be mar Chonghaileach ar léigh bhliantúil in Carriga. Tá an léigh bhliantúil seo an ómós ar Harry Holland a bhí in a gríomhar phobail aitheanta agus ina thuaisceáil agus internationally in a touch. So I'm delighted to be here tonight chairing Fail in Carriga's annual lecture in memory of Harry Holland. This yearly lecture remembers Harry, a well-known community activist who was also a socialist and an internationalist in his politics. Tá an stáraí Lorcan Collins linn is stáraí treoraí tourist agus údar a rathúil tourist camcurchna ní James cart ar bhliantúil léamh. Bhí sé linn sa bblion gafaí sa séide nuair a thug sé le Harry Holland bunithe ar Bheathaisnéis James Connolly agus tá an táhair go sé leis an le slach de leo as a Lord Ireland's War of Independence 1919 to 1921, the IRA's Guerilla campaign. So I would like to introduce tonight's main speaker, who is no stranger to Fail in Carriga, a renowned author, historian and tour guide who wrote the biography of James Connolly. Lorcan Collins is with us and he's going to read us an extract from his well-known book, Ireland's War of Independence 1919 to 1921, the IRA's Guerilla campaign. Agus in éineacht leis be an ceol project go doran, agus tá fhir go project an bhil éineacht agus garlan mai. So we're also very happy to have agus a project gan Henry Williams seo agus Lorcan Collins agus project go doran. So Billy more.
Hello guys, we're going to take it straight into a song.
Has done the land one east of Marne to a city far away. There are red lines of marching men, and their squadrons they passed me by. No pipes did hum and no battle drum did sound its dread tattoo, but the Angelus bell or the feast well rang out through the foggy June. Right proudly high o'er the Dublin sky, they hung out the flag of war. But 'twas better to die 'neath an Irish sky than I should and from the plains of royal Meath, strong men, they came hurrying through, while Britannia's sons, with their long-range guns, sailed in through the foggy dew. Oh, the night fell black, and the rifles cracked, made for perfidious Albion. Mid the lead rail, 7 songs of flame did shine o'er the lines of steel, and by each shining blade a prayer was said, that to Ireland our sons would be true. And when the morning broke, still the war flag shook its foes in the foggy dew. But the bravest fell at the requiem bell, rang mournfully loud and clear. For those who had died that Eastertide in the springtime of the year, and when the world did gaze in deep amaze at those stout-hearted men and women too, well, the bore the fight, oh, that freedom's light might shine through the foggy dew. And then back through the glen I rode again, my heart full of grief and sorrow. For I parted then with those gallant friends whom I never shall see no more. And to and fro in my dreams I will go, and I'll kneel and I'll pray for you. Oh, slavery fled our glorious dead when you fell in the foggy dew.
Tá sé an iasa bheith an seo, ceart mé in ann an ihe galéir dhéanamh as an teanga ach tá mé teachta rais agus tá sé anna meall fád, ach I gceann cúpla bliain tásúla go mé in ann ihe bheith an seo as an teanga, as an Gaeilge. Thanks very much. It's wonderful to be back here. It's great to see some familiar faces as well. And I'm delighted to be here. That's one of the most beautiful songs. My own mother, and I'm sure your own mother, sang it to you when I was a little kid, and I'm sure it had a lot of influence on what I ended up doing with my own life. But the song very much explains what happened in Easter week, and I don't think there's anyone here who doesn't know what happened then. But the aftermath, of course, is very important, and 3,500 men and 77 women were arrested for their role in the rising. Not everybody of the men actually took part in the uprising, but nonetheless they sent them to prisons in England and in Scotland, and of course more famously in Wales. 1,800 men were whittled down to a place called Frongoch in northwest Wales. And amongst those were some of the most important people who would take part in the coming fight. And there's a certain serendipity about 1,800 men being in one prison together. Because, as you know yourself, we have a term, the University of Irish Revolution, which applies not only to Longkesh, but also to Frongok. And the nucleus of the IRA were essentially formed within the barbed wire of Frongok. It was no holiday camp. Some men died in Frongok, and in fact the prison doctor, the camp doctor, committed suicide over the conditions that he had to deal with. The camp commandant had the audacity to blame the prisoners for that, and there was a near riot in the place. Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of Britain, in a conciliatory gesture, released the majority of the prisoners around Christmas 1916. There was a very smart choice on his part there, because they were released the day before Christmas Eve, so by the time they would have got back to their hometowns, Christmas Day would have been in full swing, so there was no chance for any sort of welcoming committees or anything like that. And Michael Collins wrote a very telling letter to his sister, Hanny, over in London, around about February 1917. He said, "Hanny, 4 weeks drinking Clonakilty Wrestler on a Frongok stomach is doing me no end of harm." And later in the letter, he wrote a very telling phrase where he said, "Hanny, I can't buy a drink." And that gives me a good idea to show how many people were standing Collins a drink in bars. And as you know yourself, there is no greater sort of show of respect than to stand a man a drink, or a woman, without expecting one back. And it gives you an idea that change had come about in Ireland. It wasn't complete yet. If Sinn Féin had a run in 1917, they mightn't have gotten the great result that they got soon enough. But we'll get to that, because the 1918 elections are the real litmus test for what life was like politically in Ireland. As you know, Sinn Féin had 0 seats in Westminster Parliament in 1916, but they ran for 3 seats successfully in 1917. You can include Count Plunkett, Joseph Plunkett's father, but he didn't actually run as a Sinn Féin candidate. However, he had Sinn Féin policies, for sure. So we call it 4. But in 1918, in December 1918, Sinn Féin got 73 seats out of 105. It was a meteoric rise for any political party to enjoy. I always say to Americans, it would be like the Green Party of America becoming the #1 political party 2 years from today. It would take a catastrophic swing about to bring people over. And 2 major events happened in 1918. One is that some women got a vote. 30-year-old women who had a property qualification, and as we know, 21-year-old males. But the only political party that campaigned vigorously in Ireland for votes for women were Sinn Féin. And the Irish Parliamentary Party campaigned on the tired old issue of home rule and campaigned against giving votes to women. So surely when women and many men voted, they punished the Irish Parliamentary Party quite severely for not campaigning for women. But it would be nice to say that that was the main reason for the swing-about, but never miss the fact that in April 1918, the British tried to bring in conscription into Ireland. And they brought in a new Home Rule Bill and tagged conscription onto it. And the Home Rule Bill, of course, became the Government of Ireland Act 1920, which effectively split our nation. But the Catholic Church came out against conscription. And Sinn Féin were running the anti-conscription movement. So once the church backed Sinn Féin, it meant they rose phenomenally. And as you know as well, Labour stood back, and Sinn Féin had an amazing victory that saw great change in Ireland. Incidentally, there was a new Lord Lieutenant of Ireland appointed in May 1918, the infamous Lord French. Now, normally that lieutenantship is a sort of a fellow who just goes to parties. He doesn't get involved in politics in the country. But French, a failed British Army general, I should say as well, who was replaced by the butcher Haig during World War I. I mean, if you're so bad that Haig replaced you, it gives you an idea how god-awful a general you must have been. But French said he would take the job, because it was a bit of a poison chalice as well, as long as he was given extended powers. And he, of course, wanted to force conscription in on Ireland. And of course, don't you know, he was involved in the German plot where wide-scale arrests of Sinn Féin TDs or leaders or whatever were sent back to prisons. Countess Markowitz was sent over, Eamon de Valera as well, sent to prison in England. But Michael Collins, in some way, managed to escape that, and so did Harry Holland as well. And Collins, of course, founded the most effective IRA grouping of all of the 20th century, the famous Squad. And of course, the Squad were involved in a number of ambushes, and that included various policemen as well. Hoey, Barton and Smith, the three detective sergeants who went around the 1916 prisoners choosing individuals for special attention by the British Army. So it was it was those three policemen who pointed out people like Joseph Plunkett and Sean McDermott as well. So they were given a chance to stop their political work. Of course, they refused to do so. More famously, towards the end of 1919, was the attempted assassination on French. So if you will bear with me, I wouldn't mind reading a little bit, because it's kind of nice to have a bit of talking and a bit of reading and then a bit of music as well. That's the general plan. And you can have a bit of drink as well. So I'm getting old and I refuse to get bifocals, because it seems to me that's just the thing that happens just before you get your pension. So I'm holding out. Anyway, this is titled Ambush on Lord Lieutenant French at Ashtown. And by the way, there's some people, they call themselves posh historians, who say Lord Lieutenant. There's no way anyone in Dublin ever called it anything but the lieutenant. The Squad next undertook to execute John French, Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. And after a number of attempts, the men finally received good intelligence that their target would be returning by train to Dublin from his country seat at Drumdoe House in Roscommon. French was expected to arrive on 19th of December at Ashtown Station in Dublin, from where he would be driven to the Vice-Regal Lodge in the Phoenix Park. The full-time pay were joined by Mick MacDonald, Jim Slattery, Tom Keogh and Vinnie Bourne. Martin Savage, who had fought in the Easter Rising when he was 17 years of age, insisted on coming along. The Big Four, Seamus Robinson, Dan Breen, Sean Tracy and Sean Hogan, were also invited by MacDonald. As there was a taxi driver strike over petrol permits, the IRA made their way to Ashtown on bicycles. They awaited the arrival of their quarry in Kelly's public house, where they consumed soft drinks. When the signal came that French's train had arrived in the station, the volunteers all left the pub, and Breen, Keogh and Savage attempted to push a large farm cart onto the road to block the convoy as planned. However, the cart proved too heavy, and a policeman on point duty was interfering with their progress. This delay allowed the first car, which contained French, to pass before the men had managed to get the cart into the road. The squad members, expecting French to be in the second car, launched a grenade attack and fired their guns at it. In the deadly exchange of fire, Martin Savage was mortally wounded and died in Dan Breen's arms. Breen himself was badly wounded in the leg. After the British retreat, the IRA succeeded in capturing the second car, which had nothing in it but luggage. The driver, Corporal Applesby, was in fear of his life after he surrendered, but one of the IRA men let him know that they didn't shoot prisoners. Savage's corpse was left in the yard of Kelly's pub as the proprietor would not open the door, and the ambushers made their way back to the city. Breen was eventually brought to the Malone home of 13 Grantham Street, where he spent 3 months convalescing. He later married one of the women who had looked after him there, Bridget Malone, whose brother Mick Malone had been killed during the Battle of Mount Street Bridge in 1916. Breen maintained that the ambush had been worth the risk for the potential sensation of shooting a Field Marshal of the British Army, head of the Irish government, in the capital city of the country he was supposed to rule, and all within a stone's throw of half a dozen of Britain's military garrisons.
Twas a cold December day, a lorry ploughed its way, midst bullets splash and play on Ashton Road. In that car a living tool of England's hated rule, there was the golden jewel on Ashton Road. Young Savage unafraid, with gun and hand grenade, attacked them undismayed on Ashton Road. But a bullet laid him low from the rifle of a foe. That's another death we owe for Ashton Road. But another day shall dawn like that cold December morn, when a martyr's name was born in Ashton Road. We laid him in a grave where the willows sadly wave, O son of Ireland, pay fair to thee. And 'twas a cold December day, a lorry ploughed its way, midst bullets splash and play on Ashton Road. In that car a living tool of England's hated rule, there was the gun and jewel on Ashton Road.
You'll be tired clapping, which are very good. Do you know, I suppose on a technical basis, the start of the war is January 1919. The 21st of January 1919. I mentioned 4 men. I called them the Big Four. That's what they were known as. They were part of the group of men under a great Belfast man, Seamus Robinson, who waited for days to ambush a cartload of gelignite that was being brought down to Sula Headbeg Quarry in Tipperary. And of course Dan Breen and Sean Tracy and Sean Hogan and Seamus Robinson went on the run in the aftermath of that. There was much sort of denouncing of those men in the papers. 1 or 2, however, gave a sort of a positive slant on it. So don't think that all the media were immediately against those individuals who started the war. Dan Breen, of course, would always be asked, what drove him to do so. And he was quite unrepentant about it. I think it's Cathal O'Shannon who interviewed him later on, and he says something like, Dan, do you have any regrets on shooting the 2 policemen and starting the war? And he gets very sort of tempestuous and he says, regrets? I have regrets. I regret the fact that 6 policemen didn't turn up that day because I wanted to shoot 6 policemen because I thought that would make a better impression on the people of Ireland. So I don't think Dan had any sort of sleepless nights about it. The detectives who I mentioned as well, Hoey, Barton and Smith in Dublin, Altogether, there were 500 police casualties in Ireland during the war. Now, that includes black and tans. I like the way you're going, it's not that much. That includes tans and auxiliaries, because they're lumped in all together because they swore the police oath. But obviously, it goes without saying that in the early days, when the police were being targeted, older policemen nearer retirement stood down. Some simply resigned because they didn't want to get involved in it. And numbers dropped phenomenally. And of course, that's when the war criminal Winston Churchill, as he's to be known as in this room from now on, was responsible for sending over a group of armed thugs and mercenaries who battered and brutalised their way all around Ireland. And if you think they were bad, the auxiliaries were even worse. It is the auxiliaries who charged into Croke Park first and shot wildly into the crowd. It was the auxiliaries who burnt down Balbriggan town and Cork as well, Cork City. So we tend to lump them all together under one sort of name there as the tans. And they committed some terrible atrocities around Ireland. And their name lives in ignominy. And any notion that their names should be carved onto any sort of a memorial alongside the names of men and women who fought for Ireland is a travesty. I'm just going to read a little bit about the tans. The success of the IRA's campaign against the RIC can be measured by the fact that Winston Churchill, who was then the British Secretary of State for War, decided to reinforce the police in Ireland. Many British soldiers, demobilised after the end of the First World War and unable to find honest work, joined this reserve police force for their daily wage of 10 shillings or £0.50. The main body of recruits came from London, Liverpool and Glasgow. Surprisingly, some came from Ireland and were of the Catholic faith. Although the usual RIC training lasted for 6 months, the first recruits to this temporary force arrived in Dublin on 25th of March 1920, after only a few weeks training in Gormanstown Camp, County Meath. As there was a shortage of police uniforms, the recruits were issued a mixture of clothing that included khaki and dark green, which quickly earned them the pejorative nickname Black and Tans. Black and tan are the distinctive colours of the pack of Kerry beagles still used in the Scarteen hunt in Limerick. Christopher O'Sullivan, a reporter with the Limerick Echo newspaper, wrote about how one of the new recruits he had seen at Limerick Junction. He measured up to about 5'6" and could scarcely weigh 10 stone. I would associate him with the Palace Green Scarteen hunt, i.e. the black and tan Kerry beagles, to judge by the colour of his cap and trousers. It is a myth that the black and tans were recruited from within the jail system in Britain. In fact, anyone with a police record was disbarred from joining. However, that did not disbar those who had been recruited from engaging in criminal activities such as looting, assaulting the public and murder. Many of the regular RIC men were uncomfortable with their new associates who shared barrack quarters with them. RIC Constable Eugene Bratton remembered the black and tans, 11,500 of whom served in Ireland, as a low-down lot of scoundrels. It is often asked why the tans were to swear the constable's oath for the RIC and not just act as a regular army reserve. After all, 80% of them were ex-British Army. One reason is that police numbers were in decline. Between casualties, resignations resulting from intimidation and low morale, RIC numbers needed to be increased. However, the main reason is that the British did not want the army to fight the IRA directly, as that would have legitimised the Irish cause. The British would have been officially on a war footing. The the British government preferred to state that the IRA was a criminal organisation and therefore should be tackled by the police. Some of you might recognise that attitude. At a British cabinet meeting on 30th of April 1920, French asked the Prime Minister if he would go as far as to declare war in Ireland. Lloyd George replied emphatically, "You do not declare war against rebels."
I was born in a Dublin street where the royal drums to beat, and the loving English street they tramped all over us. And every single night when we dabbled from home sing, we'd invite the neighbours out with this fine chorus. Oh, come out you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Sure wife how you won medals down in Flanders, or how the IRA made your own like hell away. The green and lonely English Shara. Oh, come tell us how you slew them all out of 2 by 2. Because soon as they had spears and bows and arrows, how you brandy faced each one with your 16-pound gun, and you frightened them and made of soon and narrow. Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down at Flanders, or how the IRA made your run like Holloway, the green and lovely age of the Shara. Come let me hear you tell how you slandered brave Cornell, how you fought him well and truly persecuted, where are the sneers and cheers that you loudly let us hear when our leaders of 16 were executed. Oh, come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA the major run like hell away from the green and lovely lays into the Shara. Well, the day is coming fast and the time will soon be near when these British Hun's feet will run before us. And if there be a need, then our kids will sing us speed with the verse or two of Stephen Bean's chorus. Come right up like a tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders, or how the IRA the major run like Holloway, the green and lovely legs of the Shara. Come right up like a tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA the major run like Holloway, the green and lovely lanes of
You have a great voice, I have to say. We didn't get any time to practice this, but I now realise there was no need to practice it. You're a great man. Yeah, well, you deserve all praise. If you want to ever cause a fight in Dublin, bring up the question as to who wrote that song, because we're divided along whether or not it was Dominic Bean or the father Stephen. I'm on the Stephen side, if you want to know, if you want to discuss it later on. And of course, it's to the tune of Russ Cough the Moon, isn't that right? Or some of you will be more familiar with the Boyne Water version of that as well. Well, nobody will be familiar with that actually now that I'm not familiar myself. Without doubt, the British had the superior weapons during the war, and some lads were out there with shotguns, and some were out going like, you know, the British had machine guns. They had far superior weapons, but if the only weapon we had, or the IRA had, was the flying column, which was a great weapon in its own way and struck fear into the heart of British troops and Tans alike. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the flying column, because a lot of us are very inclined to say that the Irish invented the concept of guerrilla warfare. Now, that's incorrect, because guerrilla warfare has been around for thousands of years. But I would say, hand on heart, that the IRA in the 1920s perfected guerrilla warfare to a great extent. And without doubt, again, the second best guerrilla army in the entire world. I'd have to say hats off to the Viet Cong, because they beat America, in all fairness. So, it's a good second place, by all accounts. A good second place. This is titled IRA Flying Columns. Organisation Memo Number 1, 1920, was issued by Óglaigh na hÉireann, Irish Volunteers, or IRA GHQ, on 4th of October 1920. It concerned the formation of flying columns. At the present time, a large number of our men and officers are on the run in different parts of the country. The most effective way of utilising these officers and men would seem to be by organising them as a flying column. In this way, they would become available as standing troops of a well-trained and thoroughly reliable stamp, and their action could be far more systematic and effective. Permanent troops of this kind would afford an exceedingly valuable auxiliary arm to the remainder of the Republican Army, which is in great measure only a part-time service militia. These flying columns would consist of only first-rate troops, as the work required of them would be very exacting. However, it should be noted that flying columns were already in operation in June 1920, several months before the GHQ issued these orders. The historian Thomas Toomey notes that the founding of the first flying columns and the whole concept of flying columns is generally accepted as having originated in East Limerick. A typical IRA flying column would use bicycles, which were relatively cheap, light enough to carry over fields, and most importantly, a very popular mode of transport. There was nothing suspicious about a few men cycling together. Vast distances could be covered by a flying column, which ideally consisted of 26 combatants. The duties of flying columns would comprise two distinct types of action: auxiliary and independent. For auxiliary action, the brigade commandants would assign the flying column as an invaluable extra force for a local attack in his area. Independent action would comprise attacks on hostile patrols and raids on postal deliveries and enemy stores. Commanders of flying columns had wide discretion, but were to keep in contact with local OCs to avoid interference with each other. Except by definite arrangement with the brigade commandant of a neighbouring area which offered an opportunity for action, flying columns were to remain in their own brigade area. Dan Breen recalled that a member of a flying column could always be recognised, not only by the rifle and revolver which he usually carried, and the trench coat, bandolier and leggings which were part of his regular outfit, but also by the razor and toothbrush which he carried after the manner of a fountain pen standing up in the breast pocket. Discipline in this matter was very strict. Cleanliness was considered essential. A column man with a dirty or unshaven face was unheard of.
Flying column in 1916 in Cork with Sean Moyle and Tipperary with Dan Breen, arrested by Free Staters and then sentenced for to die. Oh, farewell to Tipperary. across the valleys and then over the hilltops green, where we met with Denny Lacey, Sean Hogan and Dan Reid, Sean Moylan and his gallant men have kept the flag flying high. Farewell to Tipperary, says the Galtee mountain boy. We tracked the Dublin mountains and we were rebels on the road. Morning, Lord Freeman, mountains of the sun were shining high. Oh, farewell to Tipperary, mountain boy. I bid farewell to old Clonmel that I never more shall see, and to the Galtee mountains of takes shelter to me, and to the men who fought for their liberty and who died without a sigh. Oh, may their cause be ne'er forgotten, says the Galtee mountain boy.
As a lot of you know, in 1916, many parts of the country did not rise up as planned, and that's due to a number of factors, but one of them is the vast distances that had to be covered in, say, for instance, Cork County, in trying to reorganise the plans after people had been stood down. And the two heads of the volunteers down in Cork were Tomás McCurtain and Terence McSweeney. And they remembered getting 3 messages altogether. The first message from Eoin McNeill to stand down. So both men, McCurtain and McSweeney, drove around Cork town telling lads to wait up, wait up. Then a second message arrived, this time from Patrick Pearse, or Pádraig Mac Adaim, to say it's off. And they drove around Cork County, standing everybody down. And when they got back to their HQ in Cork City, here's a third message from Pearse saying, actually, we're going ahead. So you could understand why they would make a decision and go, well, you know, are we going to get another message in some time telling us it's off again? But you could hardly call those two men shirkers, because both paid the ultimate price by all accounts. Tomás McCurtain was the elected mayor, democratically elected mayor of Cork City. And in March 1920, black-and-faced policemen burst into his home on the 20th of March 1920 at 2 a.m. in the morning and woke the whole family, children and all, and murdered him in front of his family. And of course his replacement was Terence McSweeney, also a democratically elected mayor of a town, of a city. And of course he was arrested later on and sent to Brixton prison. He was already on hunger strike as he was transported over there, but he continued his hunger strike, and it lasted for an agonising 74 days altogether. And McSweeney would have been, I suppose, the most famous hunger striker in Ireland until 1981 by all accounts. But it was a particularly interesting hunger strike because word came from all around the world, focused attention on Ireland. The Pope himself sent a letter to King George asking him not to let McSweeney die. And Pádraig O'Rourke, who's a very fine historian down in Clare, told me that Ho Chi Minh wrote in his journal, "I cried today when I heard McSweeney died. A nation with such people shall never be defeated." The 31st of October 1920, and thousands of uniformed volunteers and Cumann attended the funeral. The next day, a man in Dublin by the name of Kevin Barry was hanged. And of course, Kevin Barry is the first man to be hanged since 1916, the first man to be executed since 1916. So November 1920 was a very important month in the annals, in the history of this period. And if I may read a little bit about Kevin Barry, who's a great personal hero to many people, I'm sure, here, as well as myself. On 1st of November 1920, the day after Terence McSweeney was buried, 18-year-old Kevin Barry was hanged and had been an active volunteer for a couple of years, had been involved in a number of raids, including that at King's Inn on 1st of June 1920, after which 25 British who had been captured were released by the IRA under Padder Clancy. He's the Vice Brigadier of Dublin. A medical student at University College Dublin, Kevin Barry, was due to sit an examination at 2 p.m. on 20th of September 1920. However, he was also scheduled to take part in an ambush that morning. On 20th of September, a British Army truck was due to collect bread from Monk's Bakery on Church Street, and H Company of the 1st Battalion Dublin Brigade IRA was lying in wait for the truck, intending to capture the soldiers' weapons. The ambush resulted in a shootout. Barry's .38 Parabellum jammed, and he ran for cover under the British Army lorry. 3 privates died. Harold Washington was killed in the ambush. Marshal Whitehead and Thomas Humphreys succumbed to their wounds later. Barry was captured by the British and brought to the North Dublin Union, where, although he was horrifically abused and tortured, he refused to divulge the names of his comrades. Under the orders of Dick McKee, his brigadier, a signed affidavit concerning his torture was smuggled out of Mountjoy jail later by his sister. This is a quote. "When I lay on the floor, one of the sergeants knelt on my back. The other 2 placed 1 foot each on my back and left shoulder, and the man who knelt on me twisted my right arm, holding it by the wrist with one hand, while he held my hair with the other to pull back my head. The arm was twisted from the elbow joint." Under the Restoration of Order in Ireland Act, Barry was sentenced to be hanged. No revolutionary had been executed in Ireland since the Easter Rising of 1916. With characteristic insensitivity towards a predominantly Catholic nation who loved its martyrs, the British set the date for Barry's execution, 1st of November, All Saints' Day. Michael Collins, who was beside himself with anger and worry over Barry, formulated a daring idea to liberate him 2 days before his execution. Barry's sisters were to have been on the inside, but the unexpected arrival of a visiting priest, a friend of Barry's, who was brought to see him first, ruined the timing of the attack, which centred around the changing of the guards. The rescue plan was reluctantly called off by Captain Charlie Byrne. GHQ and Barry's comrades decided on another desperate plan the following day, which involved using a mine to blow a hole in the wall of Mountjoy Prison and rushing the armed British guards. The men ready to die rescuing young Barry included IRA volunteers of the calibre of Collins himself and 3 members of the squad, Tom Ennis, Charlie Byrne and Tom Keogh, as well as Barry's close friend in H Company, Frank Flood, who would face a similar fate in Mountjoy jail less than 5 months later. All were willing to do anything to save Barry. IRA Chief of Staff Dick Mulcahy, Brigadier Dick McKee, Vice Brigadier Padder Clancy and Sean Russell, who was the director of munitions, were also ready to go through with the rescue. Others who had volunteered for the operation included veterans of the Rising like Paddy McGrath. He was executed in Mountjoy Jail on the 6th of September 1940 by De Valera. And Joseph Plunkett's brothers George and Jack Plunkett, and many others, including Barry's H Company. Gathered in premises adjoining the jail, the IRA men realised that whoever was first through the hole was bound to be shot. And every one of these men was prepared to sacrifice himself in this way. Dick McKee, as OC of the operation, chose that role for himself. Unfortunately, a constant stream of people was gathering in the vicinity of the jail to pray for Barry, and despite whispered words to send them away, the crowds grew. The attempt to free Barry was called off because too many innocent people might have died. The IRA rescue party was devastated by the failure. Lieutenant Sean O'Neill of H Company wrote later, "Every man there cried like a child. The same scene took place in all the positions which were taken up by our men, and I believe it was pitiful to see such strong and gallant men break down and cry like children when they found the attempt at rescue was off. Kevin Barry had to die for Ireland. It was God's will."
One Monday morning, high upon the gallows tree, Kevin Barry gave his young life for the cause of liberty. What a lad of 18 summers, but yet there's no one can deny, as he walked to death that morning, he proudly held his head on high. Just before he faced the hangman in his dreary prison cell, British soldiers tortured Barry just because he would not tell the names of all his brave companions and other things they wished to know. Turn informer or we'll kill you. Kevin Barry answered no. Calmly standing to attention when he bade his last farewell to his heartbroken mother, whose grief no one could tell. For the cause laws may kill the Irish, but cannot keep our spirit down. Lads like Barry are no cowards. From the foe they will not fly. Lads like Barry will free Ireland. For her cause they'll live and die.
Wonderful singing, Peter. Later on in that month, of course, Collins set out to wipe out the British spy network that was operating with great effect in Dublin. They made a serious error though, because they were very cocky and they believed that they were safe and sound in their lodgings. And of course, what they didn't realise was that Michael Collins had a network of his own spies and informants. And the most useful of all of these were some of the women who looked after rooms in hotels. And of course, they knew everything that was going on and supplied them with lists of names. And the squad and a number of other hand-picked men from the Dublin battalions were involved in shooting 14 British spies. In reaction to that, of course, the auxiliaries and the Black and Tans and the British Army and the Dublin Metropolitan Police, 4 armed forces, charged up to Croke Park in Dublin, where Tipperary were playing a match against Dublin. It was an exhibition match, and of course the auxiliaries went charging in and shot wildly into the crowd and murdered 13 persons. One person was crushed, so 14 is the full number who died. And of course, in the House of Commons the next day, they spent all the time talking about how these criminals had murdered the British spies. And one of the local Falls Road MPs, Joe Devlin, or as James Connolly always called him, wee Joe Devlin. But I think Joe became a little bit better during the kind of Tan War period than he was when he was a home ruler. And after something like 6 hours, he said to the Speaker, is there any chance we might devote some time to talking about the people that were murdered by the auxiliaries and the Black and Tans in Dublin? And Lloyd George whispered something into a fellow MP's ear, and your man ran across the floor and grabbed Joe Devlin, started to strangle him amid cries of "kill him, kill him." So, you know, that kind of madness is nothing new in the House of Commons there, I suppose, okay? That's going on now, like it's been going on for a long time, I suppose, is the point. But not saying that I just kind of lost myself what I was going to say. I went off on one there, you know. I was somewhere else. But it was a bad month, is what I'm trying to say. But it culminated in Tom Barry, who is, I would rank him as the best IRA commandant during the period. He was a former British soldier, but he joined the IRA when the war was over. He fought in Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq. So I'm going to read a little bit about the famous Kill Michael, and then Pater, you'll blast the old song out. Anyway, and by the way, for any of the younger people who haven't read Tom Barry's book, check it out. Like, you know, wonderful first-hand accounts. Guerilla Days in Ireland, I think it's called. The first and most successful attack carried out by the IRA against the auxiliaries took place on 28th of November 1920 near Kilmichael, County Cork, under the direction of Tom Barry. Barry was commandant of the 3rd West Cork Flying Column, having risen speedily through the ranks of the IRA, despite the fact that he was a former British soldier. Of all the ruthless forces that occupied Ireland during the centuries, those auxiliaries were surely the worst, Barry wrote, referring to the 150 who had commandeered Macroom Castle as their barracks since August 1920. He stated that the auxiliaries were openly established as a terrorist body and were habitual looters, describing their technique. Fast lorries of them would come roaring into a village, firing shots and ordering all the inhabitants out of doors. No exceptions were allowed. Men and women, old and young, the sick and the decrepit, were lined up against the walls with their hands up, questioned and searched. No raid was ever carried out by these ex-officers without their beating up with the butt end of their revolvers at least a half a dozen people. For hours, they would hold the little community prisoner, and on more than one occasion in different villages, they stripped all the men naked and beat them mercilessly with belts and rifles. Barry considered it strange that the IRA had not engaged the auxiliaries properly since their arrival in August, allowing them to bluster through the country for 4 or 5 months, killing, beating, terrorising and burning factories and homes. He resolved to challenge them, spurred on by the stories he heard from locals who described the auxiliaries as invincible and super fighters. 36 volunteers were assembled for the flying column and undertook special training for a week before the Kilmichael attack. Barry himself rode out by horse to establish the best place from which to ambush the enemy. However, he needed to figure out how to slow the auxiliaries down on the road to give the IRA an opportunity to engage them. Now, Paddy O'Brien had a very fine IRA officer's tunic, and Barry decided that if he borrowed it and stood out on the road, the auxiliaries would be bound to stop and investigate. It was an audacious and risky plan. Having marched for 5 hours in terrible rain, the column reached the ambush position on 28th of November at 8:15 a.m. Barry explained to his men that the position they occupied offered no line of retreat. The fight could only end in the smashing of the auxiliaries or the destruction of the flying column. There was no plan for a retirement until the column marched away victoriously. This would be a fight to the end and would be vital not only for West Cork but for the whole nation. The auxiliaries were killers without mercy. If they won, no prisoner would be brought back to Macroom. The alternative now was kill or be killed. They're Barry's words. The column was split into 3 main sections, and despite the lack of cover, the men managed to stay hidden in their soaked clothing for the next 8 hours. A scout signalled the approach of the British just around 5 o'clock. As the first cross-lead tender, which are the trucks the Tans and the auxiliaries used, turned the bend, it slowed down when the driver spotted Barry standing in the middle of the road. An IRA Mills bomb, or grenade, was hurled into the driver's cabin. As it exploded, a barrage of fire was unleashed on the auxiliaries. Close quarter fighting ensued, the auxiliaries with their handguns and the IRA using rifle butts and bayonets. The 9 auxiliaries in the first lorry were wiped out, and Barry and his men went to assist the other IRA sections whose men were engaged in the second lorry. Some of the auxiliaries shouted, "We surrender," and 2 IRA volunteers stood up only to be shot by the British, who recommenced firing. Incensed by the false surrender, Barry gave the order to commence rapid fire and not to stop until he commanded it. The auxiliaries were sandwiched between the IRA sections, and some of them called out surrender again. However, Barry ordered his men to continue firing until eventually 2 lorry loads of British lay silent on the road. The driver of the second Crossley tender, Cecil Guthrie, escaped. Guthrie had murdered an innocent civilian, Jim Lahan, in Ballyvourley less than a month earlier, and had openly boasted that he got the bee. Guthrie was captured by the 1st Cork Brigade IRA later that night and executed. Only one auxiliary survived, Lieutenant H.F. Ford, who was found the following day and brought to hospital, and was later awarded £10,000 compensation. Of the IRA men, Michael McCarthy and Jim Sullivan were dead, and 16-year-old Pat Deasy lay dying from his wounds, which would prove fatal later that night. The men in the IRA column were quick to collect 18 rifles, 30 revolvers, 1,800 rounds of ammunition, and a haul of Mills grenades. They then set the 2 trucks on fire. Barry, somewhat used to the horrors of war from his time in Mesopotamia, realised that his men were in danger of shot from the battle. He ordered them to march up and down the road, halting them, marching them, and drilling them until a sense of normality and discipline returned. The flying column then marched through the rain for 11 miles and camped in an unoccupied cottage at Granure. The men had been without a decent meal for 36 hours, had marched 26 miles and were soaked through from the rain, but they had shown the people of Ireland that the auxiliaries were not invincible.
While we hammer and song and story, the memory of Pearson McBride, their names are now illumined in such glory, with the martyrs who long have since died. Forgetting not the boys of Chonghaileach, who feared not the might of the foe, the day that they marched into battle, and they laid all the lions' hands low. So here's to the boys of Chonghaileach, those brave boys so gallant and true, who fought 'neath the green flag bearing to conquer the red, white and blue. On the 20th day of November, the Tans left the town of Macroom. They were seated in 2 crusty tenders that were bringing them straight to their doom. They were all on the road to Chonghaileach, they were never expecting to stop, but they there met the lads from the column who made a clean sweep of the lot. Oh, so here's to the boys of Chonghaileach, those brave boys so gallant and true. They fought 'neath the green flag bearing to conquer the red, white and blue. Well, the sun in the west it was sinking on the eve of a cold winter's day, when the Tans ran into the spot where we lay, and then saw the peal of their rifle and gun. The flames from the lorries brought tidings at the so here's to those brave boys of gallant and true, who fought 'neath the green flag bearing to conquer the red, white and blue. Well, the lorries were out before twilight, and high over Dunmanway town, our just to show that the Tans had gone down. So we gathered our rifles and bayonets far away town of Granure. So here's to the boys of Chonghaileach, those brave boys so gallant and true. Oh, so here's to the boys of Chonghaileach, those brave boys so gallant and true. Yes, they fought 'neath the green flag bearing to conquer the red, white and blue.
Classic. If Kilmichael was a tremendous morale boost to the IRA, there was a terrible event happened in Clonmult in East Cork, and respect Dublin because they have a tremendous collective written statements from the men and women who fought throughout the revolutionary period. But this photograph they were kind enough to lend me or give me for the book, and it's 10 IRA from Clonmulton. And if you get a close look at it, and you will, they're around there, you'll see that their attire is not the attire of, not the clothes of wealthy individuals. They're farm labourers, is what they are. And in Dublin, I would say there were working class individuals who were involved in the IRA as well. But the staggering aspect of this photograph is that 7 of those men died in one battle called Clonmulton in February 1921, when the British Army surrendered the IRA's headquarters. There was a fierce fight lasting over an hour and a half, and towards the end of it, the Tans arrived. And the British had been fighting fair. It was just they were behind walls and just sniping. Here in the shirt ran through the lines trying to break through to get help, and he was cut down, so he was. But when they were all surrendered, but Pat Higgins survived and lived to tell the tale. But then, of course, decided to charge him, and he was sentenced to be executed. His execution date was set for August 1921, but a truce, as you know, came on the 11th of July 1921, and he survived. He survived that. I was telling this story to some friends of ours from across the big ocean. Visibly upset by the story, and she sidled up to me at the end and asked me the name of the man again, and I said it was Pat Higgins, and she said, did he die in the end? And I said, Ma'am, I'm sorry to tell you, it's 100 years ago. So yes, he did die in the end. And she said, well, that's very sad. So there you go. It's hard to fathom sometimes, I suppose, isn't it? You know. But what was I going to say? Of course, I'm going to mention Tom Barry again because I wanted to read a little bit about what's called the Battle of Crossbarry. Nothing to do with Tom Barry, but it's down in Cork again. And you may say to me at the end, my God, you were quite Cork-centric. But like, really, it was where the big major kind of events were, and it's hard not to be, okay? There is lots as well, like, you know. But anyway, I'll read you a little bit about the Battle of Crossbarry. In the run-up to St. Patrick's Day, Tom Barry, Commandant of the 3rd West Cork, this is 1921 I should say, of the 3rd West Cork Flying Column, Liam Deasy, the Brigade Adjutant, and Tyg O'Sullivan, the Quartermaster, asked the piper Flor Begley to join these flying columns and help celebrate the national feast in style by ambushing some lorries to the accompaniment of his pipes. However, the planned ambush at Shippool in Shannon on 17th of March 1921 did not come to fruition, as the British were informed of the plans and returned to their barracks at Kinsale. The IRA flying column marched northwards towards its Ballymurphy HQ. The British Army in Cork under Lieutenant General Strickland had captured an IRA company captain, Pat Coakley, during the Upton train ambush. Coakley divulged the whereabouts of the 3rd Cork Brigade HQ. After a day arresting, the flying column arrived in Ballyhandle beside Crossbarry, County Cork at 1:38 a.m. on 19th of March and retired to billets, which were, well, you know what they are, but I had to explain to people who don't, which were basically beds provided by people in the local area. After about a half an hour though, the alarm was raised. British lorries were reported to be slowly approaching their position from various directions. An area of about 4 miles in circumference was taken in by the British troops, whose plan was to arrest every man and boy they came across in all the houses in the district, moving slowly but thoroughly. The IRA officers decided to wait in ambush for the British at Crossbarry, 8 miles from Bandon and 12 miles from Cork. The column was divided into sections of 14 men. The residents of the area were sent to safety while barricades were built, mines laid, and positions allocated to each section. Soon the lorries were spotted on the Bandon Crossbarry Road, but the British were also coming from other directions. No fewer than 24 lorries of military left Bandon. 600 military came from Cork and Ballincollig and 300 from Kinsale. The IRA flying column lay in position from about 4:30 a.m. and at about 8 o'clock a long line of British lorries drove slowly towards them. Michael O'Driscoll recalled in his witness statement, when the first lorry was opposite our position, soldiers started to get out of the lorries. We got orders to fire and we gave it to them at point blank. Florence Begley proceeded to play the pipes and continued to do so whilst the firing lasted. O'Driscoll recalled that the pipes had a great effect on the IRA and he felt that they could have tackled the whole British Army. The superior firepower of the British did not come into play though, as the IRA men were very fortunate that a bullet penetrated the drum of an enemy machine gun which was in a position on a lorry, thereby jamming it. Edward White, a civilian prisoner in one of the lorries, managed to escape during the battle and carried the machine gun away. When the firing ceased, the IRA went onto the road to collect arms and set fire to the British vehicles. The second wave of attack came from 200 British on the left flanks of the IRA, but they were tackled by the section under the command of Dennis Lorcan. Peter Carney's section was moved up to reinforce this position. A third attack came when a platoon of British who had come from the Bandon direction was engaged by Christy O'Connell's men, who forced the British to withdraw. The fourth assault was dealt with by Tom Kelleher's section at the rear of Crossbarry, where 2 IRA men were killed. Tom Barry reinforced this section and the men succeeded in shooting an officer, whereupon the remaining British turned and ran. As Barry rounded up his men, he congratulated them and explained that they would have a 20-mile march ahead of them. Just as they were about to move out though, the IRA spotted a group of disorganised British soldiers in the distance. They appeared to be leaderless as they were standing around in the centre of a small field on the sloping hillside east of Crossbarry. Barry ordered all of his men to line up and prepare to fire. Tom Kelleher remembered that the sound of 100 IRA rifles firing in 3 successive moments and all at the same time was very effective, as helter-skelter the English broke in all directions. The Battle of Crossbarry was over. Just one more line. By attacking the British at Crossbarry, the IRA had succeeded in breaking up the enemy's encircling movement, but there were some losses. Jeremiah O'Leary, Con Daly and Peter Monaghan, who had joined the IRA after deserting the British Army, were killed during the fight. 10 British soldiers were killed in the fight. The lost chance of capturing Barry's flying column was a big blow to the British, who had been very close to achieving a major coup. The famous burning of the Custom House in Dublin is often considered by many to have led directly to the British wanting to have a truce with the IRA. And of course, Eamon de Valera had been over in the United States for a year and a half, raising funds, and in some situations dividing American, Irish-American sort of opinion as well. But whatever about him and whatever happened to the money, when he did come back, he wanted to get involved with organising a proper attack. And of course he decided that the IRA should have one big attack every month. Michael Collins preferred the idea of lots of little sporadic attacks all around Ireland, but De Valera was quite insistent. And in fairness to him, the burning of the Custom House was quite a success. Liz Gillis, who's a great historian of that period, of that actual battle, says that there were 270 IRA who were involved in that one attack. They took over local fire brigade stations, and in some cases anyway, the fire brigade were quite supportive of the IRA at the time. But as people were phoning up to say, you know, the Custom House is on fire, it was the IRA who were answering the phone saying, yes, we're on our way, hang fire if you will. But the appointed date for the burning of the Custom House was the 25th of May at 12:55 p.m. in broad daylight. The Dublin Brigade of the IRA began the task of setting the Custom House on fire. Commandant Tom Ennis of the 2nd Battalion was in charge of the volunteers who entered the building. They were joined by members of the squad under Paddy Daly and the ASU, the Active Service Unit. Their job was to hold up the entire staff and assemble them in the main hall and provide protection to the 2nd Battalion. Outside the building, the 1st Battalion provided protective cover to those inside. And more importantly, the 1st Battalion and the 3rd and 4th Battalions took over the local fire brigade stations. The engineers of the 5th Battalion were also involved in cutting telephone wires in manholes and on high telephone poles. A lorry load of paraffin arrived at the rear of the Custom House, and tins of the flammable oil were carried as surreptitiously as possible inside. The paraffin oil was used to saturate every office in the building thoroughly. Paraffin is a much more useful liquid for setting fire to things because the petrol evaporates too quickly. The first casualty was the caretaker, Francis Davis, who put up a struggle and was shot. He died later in the afternoon. Each floor of the building, or particular parts of the floors, was in charge of a company OC. And the signal for calling off the men was to be 2 sharp blasts on a whistle from the battalion OC. By coincidence, 2 company OC's whistles were sounded almost together, and some men mistook the signal and started to retire. One IRA officer reported that his men had not finished the job and they were sent back in to the floor to finish it. But these few minutes were the difference between a successful retirement and the arrival of British forces at 1:25 p.m, 5 minutes after the allotted completion time. 2 Crossley tenders full of auxiliaries turned in onto Eden Quay, passing Liberty Hall into Beresford Place. The auxiliaries jumped from their lorries and took positions behind the pillars that supported the railways. The 1st Battalion IRA engaged the enemy, firing from revolvers and throwing a number of grenades at them. Sean Prendergast recalled, "In a trice all was excitement as rifles and revolver shots rent the air, and billowing smoke of the burning building and flashes of flames could be distinctly seen mounting. Daniel Head threw a grenade into a British lorry and was shot 5 times by the auxiliaries. A double-turreted armoured car driving around the area sprayed bullets from its Hotchkiss machine gun, And as the IRA in the Customs House returned fire as best as they could with their revolvers, Edward Dorrans of E Company's 2nd Battalion had been kidnapped by the auxiliaries 3 months previously and thrown into the River Liffey. On this occasion he was not so lucky, as he was shot in the head during the fighting and died instantly. The quartermaster of the 2nd Battalion, Paddy O'Reilly, was wounded badly during the battle and seems to have been shot dead afterwards. Harry Holland recalled seeing his corpse on the night before his funeral. There was a small bullet entrance wound in the side of his nose, which plainly showed scorching, indicating that the gun, presumably an automatic, had been placed at his head when fired. Paddy's brother Stephen, who was assistant adjutant of the 2nd Battalion, was also killed in the battle. Now, a party of black and tans who were billeted in a hotel on the quays came running towards the Custom House. They came under fire from members of the ASU on Butt Bridge. The tans took cover behind Guinness barrels, where they engaged the IRA, who eventually withdrew at 1:50 p.m. when their ammunition was spent. Inside the Custom House, the order was given that all guns were to be dumped and all volunteers were to mingle amongst the staff. However, some of the IRA men made desperate bids to run through the gauntlet of British fire. James Connolly recalled that he and Sean Doyle, whose brother Patrick had been executed by the British on 14th of March 1921, felt that they wouldn't stand a chance if they were arrested. Both men charged out of the Custom House and were fired on by the British. They escaped, but Doyle was shot in the lung and died 5 days later in the Mater Hospital. Tom Ennis was one of the last to leave the building and managed to escape despite suffering a horrendous bullet wound in the groin. Soon the auxiliaries entered the Custom House, where they shot a young civilian temporary clerk from the local government board, Mahon Lawless, who died later. 2 other civilians also died in the shooting. They were James Connolly and John Bourne. Eventually, when people had cleared out the building, senior staff members helped the British to separate employees from the IRA. In all, 108 Republicans were captured. When eventually the fire brigade came on the scene, it became clear to which side the firemen gave their allegiance. Upon entering the building, firemen, including Michael Rogers, spread the fire into parts of it which had not previously been on fire. To escape, Rogers went to Tara Street for spare uniforms for some volunteers who were still in the Custom House. Arrests and deaths, Oscar Traynor later described the destruction of the success because it led directly to the arrangement of the truce on the 11th of July 1921. Eamon de Valera, who had been missing for the majority of the war and had not been associated with a battle since 1916, could claim the attack as his victory because it had been his idea. Now, the subject of ammunition and the lack thereof, behind the scenes over in America, there was very active support of a fledgling company called the Thompson Submachine Gun Corporation, which was being funded by Harry Boland and IRA and IRB money. And in June 1921, 2 Tommy guns were brought over to Dublin, and they tested them in the casino in Marino, where they had an underground firing sort of a thing, you know. And Michael Collins was very impressed with them. And the IRA, I showed this in the book, ended up buying 903 of the very first Thompson submachine guns, which were being made by the Colt Corporation. 650 of the Tommy guns were on the New Jersey docks, ready to set sail for Ireland and due to arrive here in June 1921, until some Swedish busybody customs man stuck his big nose in where he shouldn't have been sticking it. The other customs men who knew what was going on were trying to say, look, it's all right, don't worry, oh no, we must at least end up seizing them. And eventually, anyway, many of those weapons did make their way to Ireland. Some with the serial numbers obliterated, but many with the serial number like T00s, like loads of zeros, 3, 2, very early serial numbers. I was in a museum over Spill in, I think it was in Wexford, and my dad had given a sword in years ago, like an old sword, and I wanted it back. I was doing a bit of work there as well, and I said to the lady, I said, look, if we gave a sword in here, you know, any chance like you might still have it? And she said, sure, what's the name? And I said my dad's name, and she brought me to like a kind of a store of loads of great things, you know. And of course, I remembered the sword because we played with it when we were kids, before the health and safety regulations of this generation. But I saw a T-gun, a Tommy gun, in the corner, like, you know, and I picked her up and I was going, like this, you know, and she had this kind of very sort of dead face, and I said, no, actually, you're the very first. I was going, all right, well, what else do you do when you see a T-gun? So the reason we chose this song anyway is because it mentions the Tommy gun.
Play on the merry pillow boy, make pal the fields all day. On my way, I'm sick and tired of slavery since the day that I was born. So I'm off to join the IRA, and I'm off tomorrow morn. And we're all off to Dublin in the green, where the helmets glisten in the sun, where the bayonets flash and the rifles clash to the echo of a Thompson gun. I leave beside my peck on his spade, I leave beside me polite, and I leave beside me horse and yoke, for no more I need than die. And I leave beside my Mary, for she's the girl I do adore. And I wonder if she thinks of me when she hears my Tommy gun roar. And we're all off to Dublin in the green, where the helmets glisten in the sun, oh, where the bayonets flash and the rifles crash to the echo of a Thompson gun. And when the war is over, yes, some dear old Ireland's free, well, I'll take her to the chapel on the hill, and a rebel's wife she'll be. Well, some men fight for gold, oh, but the IRA they're fighting for the land and the Saxon sword. The green, where the helmets they glisten in the sun, and where the bayonets flash and the rifles crash to the echo of a Thompson gun.
Well, we're drawn to a close, so don't lose hope. Don't despair. If the tans were bad, the infamous specials were 10 times worse. And I wrote a little piece here, and I suppose, seeing as I'm in Belfast, it would make a lot of sense to write a little bit about it. And incidentally, in case I forget to mention, when the tans were stood down, Churchill set up a gendarme over in Palestine, and a lot of tans and auxiliaries ended up going over there, fighting against the Israelis then, when they were trying to establish an independent nation. And it's a curious thing that the tans pulled down houses that belonged to the families of IRA volunteers, and they set fire to them and pulled the roofs down and pulled them down. They destroyed Michael Collins's family home as well. But they brought that little tactic over with them to Palestine as well. And it's very curious to see now that the Israeli Defence Force utilised the same tactics against people from Hamas, maybe. When they captured them, they pulled down and bulldozed their houses. And so it's very interesting how you see these things progressing to other parts of the world. And as usual, it's no surprise to find that it was the British who invented it, if you will. But anyway, here's a little bit about the specials. And then when we're having a drink later, you can come up to me and go, that was wrong, and that bit. Anyway, here it goes. James Craig was a leading member of the Orange Order and also a member of the British Cabinet as Parliamentary and Financial Secretary to the Admiralty. He suggested to Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, that a special police force would provide some assistance in the northern region of Ireland, and that this would relieve the pressure on the RIC men who were stretched in the fight against the IRA. The Prime Minister agreed, and on 1st November 1920, the Ulster Special Constabulary were formed. The specials were to operate in 6 counties in the northern area of Ireland, comprising Armagh, Antrim, Down, Fermanagh, Tyrone and Derry. The force was made up almost entirely of Protestant men, many of whom were members of the Ulster Volunteer Force. Members of the Catholic nationalist population were not encouraged to join, either by the British government or indeed the IRA. In all, some 32,000 men joined the Ulster Special Constabulary, USC. About 5,000 of those were in the A Specials and acted as full-time paid members, serving alongside the RIC in their local areas. 19,000 were members of the notorious B Specials and were part-time members who served under their own command structure. The rest of the men, called C Specials, were older individuals who undertook lighter duties. The Specials were involved in many reprisals against nationalists and in many ways behaved in the same unruly manner as the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, terrorising the Catholic minority of the 6 counties, not only between 1920 and 1922, but throughout the period up to 1970. In Belfast, on 23rd of March 1922, 2 A Specials were shot dead by the IRA. The following day, Friday 24th of March, suspected members of the USC burst into the McMahon home on Kinnaird Road in Belfast. Owen McMahon was a successful businessman, owner of the Capstan Bar and a director of Glentoran Football Club. He was considered quiet and apolitical, but he was a Catholic, and that was all the Specials needed. They herded Owen McMahon, his 6 sons and a friend and employee, Edward McKinney, into one room, separating them from the women of the house. The Specials opened fire on the men and the boys for a full 5 minutes. Edward McKinney, the barman, was killed. Owen McMahon and his sons, Frank, 24, Patrick, 22, and Gerard, 15, were also killed. Bernard McMahon, 26, died of his wounds later. The youngest son, 12-year-old Michael, was shielded behind some furniture and feigned death. The murders caused revulsion, even in the House of Commons, but no police were ever charged. A few days later, after the shooting of an RIC man, George Turner, on the Old Lodge Road, 10 RIC men went on the rampage in nationalist areas. On Stanhope Street, they broke into a house and shot Joseph McCrory in his kitchen. Bernard McKenna, a father of 7 children, was shot in his bed at his home on Park Street. On Arnon Street, the murder gang smashed its way into the home of William Spallon, who had just buried his wife, a victim of the conflict. The policeman shot the 70-year-old man in front of his grandson, who saw them take £20 intended to pay for William's wife's funeral. The police then used the sledgehammer to break into the house next door, where they bludgeoned Joseph Walsh to death in front of his children. A 6-month-old baby, Robert, was also killed in the attack. That evening, the gang shot John Mallon, a 60-year-old Catholic, on Skegnall Avenue. The chief suspect, according to an IRA report, was District Inspector John William Nixon from Brown Street Barracks, who made the lives of the people unbearable while permitting to work in the barracks to snipe at the residents on their way to mass or to work. That's a quote, but I can't remember what the quote's from. Nixon was rewarded by the British Crown with an MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, for services rendered. In 1924, Nixon was dismissed from the police after he gave a political speech at his Orange Hall contravening police regulations. Now, we don't want to end on such a sort of a sad note, so between myself and
What's your name?
sorry, I had a brain collapse. It was bound to happen. Sorry, Corey.
Sorry, Tim.
Yeah. We're going to go out on a good old song that is called Ómós de Bheathaisnéise, and you're encouraged to sing along. But after this now, I'll stop talking. But first of all, Guerilla bhliantúil agus tá gut all in a gut agus but charca mai tú X Factor no for our own part, we'd certainly like to thank you for coming along tonight, and I thank the Holland family for having me back. I feel very, very privileged to have come back again after you known me the first time. It's amazing you asked me back the second time. So I thank you very much, and Fergal Guerilla for organising everything as well.
Shade of